All right, guys, the final lecture for Key Concept 3. This is 3.3. College Board states increased economic productive capacity and its consequences. Innovation stimulated agricultural and industrial production in many regions. Agricultural production increased significantly due to technological innovations. So you want to be able to identify what those technological innovations were. Definitely want to be able to explain the changes occurring in China from an industrial standpoint. So we have the Chinapa field systems. Remember, the Aztecs had these floating gardens that allowed them to grow more corn. The city of Tenochtitlan was actually an island, so they definitely adapted to the geography. Waru agricultural techniques in the Andes Mountains. The Incas had the terracing techniques, right, where they were able to grow food on a mountainside. The horse collar. In China, they used manure for fertilizer. There were new irrigation systems using water wheels, pumps, and terraces. And don't forget the iron plow, right? So there was a great example of using industry. And the Grand Canal obviously helped farmers transport goods. And then they had that fast ripening rice, the champa rice, not chinapa, but champa rice that came from Vietnam. That's during the Tang Dynasty. Okay, so definitely be able to identify some of those agricultural innovations that were occurring. Definitely the Chinapa field system, and I think the iron plow in China and the fast ripening rice. Demand for foreign luxury goods increased in Afro-Eurasia. Chinese, Persian, and Indian artisans and merchants expanded their production of textiles and porcelains for export. Industrial production of iron and steel expanded in China. So that's important, right? Industrial production of iron and steel expands in China. That's probably going to be, an answer on a test or something you want to elaborate on a short essay. So, the Chinese and Persians expanded, porcelain. We know that the Chinese began to not only, use iron, but smelt iron into steel for tools and weapons. And this is the proto-industrial period, right, where we also saw the production of porcelain during the Song Dynasty, right? That's the commercial revolution happening in China, right? Not only from an agricultural standpoint, but from this, proto-industrial. We're not seeing European factories emerge, but we're seeing some changes happening, at least in China. The fate of cities varied greatly, with periods of significant decline and period of increased urbanization, buoyed by rising productivity and expanding trade networks. So that's important, right? We have growth, urban growth, and we have urban decline kind of happening during this large time period. Multiple factors contributed to the decline of urban areas, including invasion, disease, and the decline of agricultural productivity. So that's important, right? Disease. And so we have the Little Ice Age in Europe, right, where you're going to see colder temperatures hurting farmers. The plague obviously hurt the economy of Europe. As we get closer to the 1500s, we're going to see, obviously, the warming occurring. So you'll see a map where you'll see, plunging temperatures over, a long period, and then rising temperatures. So as temperatures decline, so do populations. As temperature rise, so will populations. The invasions of the Mongols, the Huns, and the Turks definitely impacted the growth of China, at least the urban cities. Remember, the Silk Roads actually hurt the cities of Baghdad and Cairo because, it allowed travelers to bypass those cities and move more quickly to Constantinople, right, or Venice or Florence. So, the Silk Roads definitely had an impact on those cities negatively. All right, the subconcept, identify the factors that gave rise to rising urbanization. So the end of the Mongol invasions, especially in Russia, when the Mongols kind of, leave, you're going to see those city-states emerge and become more urbanized, right? Like Moscow, for example, or what would later become St. Petersburg, the city that would later become St. Petersburg, Kiev. The availability of safe and reliable transport. So, Indian Ocean trade became more reliable, more effective. That's going to help, especially cities like, Venice and Florence. European cities are going to grow. The rise of commerce and warmer temperatures between 800 and 1300 helped agricultural productivity. More people meant more workers, more demand for goods, and centralized governments. Kings like Henry and Louis are going to consolidate their power. And because of that, they're going to, actually want to see, trade growth. They're going to expand their empires overseas. The commercial revolution by the mid-1500s, that's going to spur on the age of discovery, and European countries like Spain and England are going to bring more gold and silver into Europe, which is going to increase wealth and just kind of grow the economy even further. A key concept is despite significant continuities in social structures and in methods of production, there was some important changes in labor management and the effect of religious conversion on gender relations and family life. So the sub-concept would be that we're going to focus on here is the diversification of labor organization that began with settled agriculture. And forms of labor organization included there was free peasant agriculture, nomadic pastoralism, craft production and guild organization, various forms of coerced and unfree labor, and government-imposed labor taxes and military obligations. So in short, you're just going to see different methods of labor. Slavery is a continuum, but you're going to see obviously the system of feudalism emerge, right? You're going to see the Meta system emerge in the Americas. So, for example, remember the Byzantine Empire introduced a theme system where if you worked or joined the military, you could earn your freedom. The Aztec tribute system. Conquered people had to not only give tribute, but they could also perform military service. So that's again, this is just kind of new ways to get people to work. And the Meta system, which would be performing public service, building the Inca Road to contribute as a form of tax. The poll tax in England, this was important. We didn't talk about this, but I would remember it. King Richard II wanted to pay for wars in Europe with France, so King Richard, who was English, imposed a tax. And peasants like Wat Tyler weren't happy about that tax, and that led to the Peasant Revolt of 1381. So, this is, these peasants are already giving up their crops, they're poor, and now they have to add a tax to that. So they weren't too happy over the Peasant Revolt. Guilds were, where the artisans and merchants come together like a union. They created rules for apprenticeships. How do you, how do you train someone? And that helped families and workers. And that did put pressure on a lord or a monarch to make sure that, laborers were being paid, well, right? So it contributed to kind of regulations of trade and hours, right? Regulations for hours. And these are early unions, so don't forget the guild system. All right, sub-concept is as in previous periods, social structures were shaped largely by class and caste hierarchies. Patriarchy persisted. Remember, that's a continuum. However, in some areas, women did exercise more power and influence. Most notably, and this is important, the Mongols and communities in West Africa. So if you're going to, highlight two regions where women had more rights, definitely focus on the Mongols and Islamic women in West Africa. Whereas in Japan and Southeast Asia, you're going to see a continuation of kind of the Chinese expectations for a woman. All right, so in the Mongols, we know women were very independent, much more than any other society, going probably back to the Persians, perhaps. Women tended to flocks of sheep, they rode horses, they fought in battle, they wore the same clothing as men, they could initiate divorce. If you've ever seen the story of Mulan, Mulan was, a woman who obviously, if you know the story, she dressed up as a man and fought in battle. So if you see a source of Mulan, which is possible, definitely think about, the growing roles of women, at least in the Mongol Empire. Islamic women had more rights probably than you would see in Asia. Remember, Muhammad raised the status of women. He treated his wives with love and respect. His wife was educated and owned her own business. They had much higher status than Christian women or Jewish women. They could inherit property, receive a cash settlement for divorce, and use birth control. I think that's the first society where, you see the promotion of birth control. Women who testified in court were protected, but they still, at least in the Arab region, they had to wear a veil or hijab, right? And they were part of harems, harem politics. So I would say women in Africa were less patriarchal. Women didn't have to wear the hijab or the veil. So remember harem politics, where a caliph would take 4 wives or a concubine, but wives would compete to influence the caliph. Khaisaran, who was the mother of Harun, was noted for her attempts to influence the caliph. So remember the idea of harem politics would be great in an essay if you kind of added that, right? How they were influential. They weren't ruling, but they were influential, and sometimes, they were told to kind of step back. In Africa, again, societies were matrilineal. That's new. A man's inheritance went to his sister's son, right? So if you're a ruler, it would be your sister's son who would maybe take over. That's a matrilineal society. Women and men who were not married actually could mix freely and openly. That's probably unique to Africa, maybe not Arabia. We talked about the hijab. Ibn Battuta, he noticed this in Africa, and he commented about how women in Africa had different rights, and there were different customs. Islamic women. In China, patriarchy was strengthened during the Song dynasty. So hard to believe, but you're probably going to evidence of that would be foot binding, right? It signified social status. And that was also done to restrict women's contributions. They couldn't walk very well. So they were going to be less likely to do things, that men could do, physically. But you did have some women who were, impressive in their accomplishments. Li Qinzhao was one of the great poets. She was divorced and remarried, so she was a symbol of increased rights. A lot of her stories wrote about the economic prosperity during the Song dynasty. And Empress Wu, we mentioned her. She tried to make Buddhism the state religion. So the fact that she was an empress shows that women in China could achieve a lot of power, and that was during the Song dynasty. So Empress Wu. There was a new class in China. So, we have the merchants more on the bottom. The peasant farmers were more in the middle. On top would be the ruling family. Right below the ruling family, though, would be the scholarly gentry, right? The educated class. They would actually, deal with the military. And that's during the Song dynasty. So not, the landowners were kind of, now they're kind of on the same level as the landowners. So you have the ruling family, the landowners, and the scholarly gentry kind of now in the same boat. So they actually outnumbered the landowners, the aristocracy. And it was the Confucianism and the Confucian philosophy that was the basis for their beliefs. And they were very influential, especially with military affairs. And that actually contributed to some problems, right? They didn't have the experience and that maybe some of the aristocratic nobles had in terms of warfare. All right, sub-concept, we're almost done. New forms of coerced labor appeared, including serfdom in Europe and Japan, and the elaboration of the mita in the Inca Empire. Free peasants resisted attempts to raise dues and taxes by staging revolts. The demand for slaves for both military and domestic purposes increased, particularly in Central Eurasia. That would be the Mongols. Parts of, not the Mongols, that would be... the old Persian Empire, parts of Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. So the mita system, very important. It's kind of like corvée labor, if we go back to Unit 2, a form of tribute, but it would be contributing in the form of labor. Public service was also required in the building of the roads, so they built the Inca roads, and they had to perform military service. You had to work a certain number of days. The basic meaning of the word mita is the turn or season. Due to, depending on wealth, a family would only have to maybe require 65 days to farm. And the rest of the year, you would, even the wealthy would have to perform their mita service. And that would actually be used later on by the Spanish. It would be the foundation of the encomienda system, where, the indigenous peoples were put to work. And it was, legalized or justified by the Catholic Church. slavery, for the most part. There was the Peasant Revolt, as I mentioned, in 1381. Wat Tyler led peasants against tax collectors because the king needed to pay for some wars. And eventually it was withdrawn, but the peasants kind of were forced back to their old way of life as we grew closer to the 1400s. So the Peasant Revolt, I think of the Yellow Turban Rebellion. There was the revolt in the Byzantine Empire as well. I kind of can't remember it, but try to remember some of these lower class revolts. And there was the end of feudalism. The Black Death, very important. People were dead. There weren't a lot of workers. So basically, if you were one of the surviving workers, you could now ask for wages, right? Supply and demand. So please understand that concept of the impact of the Black Death on feudalism. Also, French kings started to free serfs. Why? Now they could charge them higher taxes, right? Sell them land or rent them land, and now you could make some money off them. All right, that's it, guys. That's Unit 3. Definitely study up for your exam.